That's cool. When we're talking about using these SIM platforms, or more specifically, using any one of these tools to potentially identify characteristics of specific threats or detection, using them for threat detection per se. We just talk a little bit more about, and I know this is a kind of a favorite topic of yours as well. I'd like you to kind of talk to us a little bit more about detection as code, and why it's so important, why it's so prevalent as well, and maybe a little bit about how Panther does it. That would be great.
Of course. So going back to the flexibility element, I think when you have a domain-specific language, like I'm just going to keep using Splunk as an example because it's probably the one people relate the most to, but you have to have a cheat sheet to use Splunk, and you have to know all of its little nuances to really know how to interact with the data. And when you get these searches that become really, really complicated, it's just kind of chaotic. And the benefit of detections as code is that's universal. So using a language like Python, which has a fairly low barrier to entry, it's probably one of the easier languages that one could learn. And I think it may be one of the most popular languages, if not the most popular programming language in the world at this point. We really just found that standardizing is just a great base to work off of. But also it's just, you can basically do anything you would want with it. The funny thing is we end up doing things that, aren't always inherently complex, but they're very easy to understand and they're testable. And that's very, very important because you want to know that your detection is actually going to work when you run it and when you deploy it, per se. So it's that's a really important element. So in security, you obviously never want to get breached. So if you have a detection that's like, hey, identify this thing that should never happen, having tests is really helpful for that. And then you hope that you actually never get that real alert, but being able to unit test your detections it's such an important paradigm that I think just never existed in security until like we had basically added it. I think I'd written it into Streamalert like very early and was like, oh, we're definitely doing this in Panther. And that's really the one thing why it's important. I think version control and collaboration is the second piece. So kind of as an extension of that, or maybe even just more broadly, I would just say that the most important thing of detections as code is adopting the developer mindset and developing these developer paradigms. That is the key reason why it's so important. And then there's a bunch of these other benefits, like I just touched on testing. I'll touch on like version control and collaboration. That's another reason, right? If you have a team of people, which you always do, it's never just a single person, hopefully. Analyst or engineer one's like, hey, I want to look for this type of behavior. If, someone logs in from the US and their name kind of looks like that and all these other things, and maybe I'm using regular expressions, maybe I'm using lists, maybe I'm, keeping a cache of certain things, there's this whole other mindset you can have now that you have the power of Python at your control. And then you can get feedback from that and you can, have these sort of stable, reliable, consistent patterns that are built in because you're using code. And you can code review it with other people, and then you can have automated pipelines that deploy it. And it's just more reliable. It's more scalable as the team grows as well. So that's another key reason why it's important. And then I think I might just go back to the extensibility as a third one. Like over time, what ends up happening is because you have Python and because you have a team, as you grow, you identify patterns, and then you can abstract those patterns out into libraries and helpers. And then there just start to be these things that emerge that become even more sustainable over time. So it's a really great paradigm. I mean, I've loved it for a really long time, and I think it is pretty game changing in the realm of security, and not having to fuss around with DSLs anymore. I think the only downside with it is that if you don't know Python, then you have to learn it. But learning Python is a great career skill to have, especially in security when everything is getting bigger and more complicated and you really do need code at your disposal. Even if you're not using a SIM, you just need to have that skill regardless, to do some type of analysis or maybe build some automation. Maybe you want to ping a user and ask them a question. and get a response, right? Like that's something you could write yourself, or you could use something like Tines or whatever it may be. But like having that skill as a security person, I think just really ups your ability to do your job now and in the next like 5 to 10 years.